The wall was higher than Mira remembered. She stood at the base of it, rain coming down hard enough to blur everything past 10 feet, and recalculated. 3 months of planning. She'd measured this wall 4 times. In daylight, it was manageable. In a storm, in the dark, with Kai behind her holding a stuffed bear named Captain by one ear, it was a different problem entirely. Nuna. Kai's voice was directly at her shoulder. The guard changed early. She turned. He was right. The light in the security booth had changed. Wrong shadow, wrong posture. Someone had swapped shifts at least 40 minutes ahead of schedule. How long have you known that? Since we left the building. Kai. You looked busy. She grabbed his hand and ran for the east side. The east wall had one advantage. The old oak tree that the administration had been meaning to cut down for 2 years and never did. Mira reached it first, tested the lowest branch, pulled herself up. Kai followed without being told, Captain tucked under one arm, moving through the tree with the unbothered efficiency of a child who had climbed out of worse places for smaller reasons. They cleared the wall. Kai landed wrong, left foot, bad angle, and sat down hard in the mud on the other side. He looked at his shoe, looked at Mira. That went better than I expected, Kai muttered, his breath coming in short, ragged puffs. Mira yanked him to his feet. Her fingers were raw from the climb. Shoes, she snapped, her voice barely louder than the storm. Kai looked down. His left sneaker was missing a lace, the tongue flopping open like a dead fish. He didn't complain. He just jammed his foot deeper into the canvas and ran to keep up with her stride. 3 months earlier, Mira had not been planning an escape. She'd been looking for a pen. The director's office was empty on Thursday afternoons. Everyone knew this. Nobody used the information. Mira used it. She slipped in, found a pen on the desk, and was turning to leave when the bottom drawer caught her eye. Not because it was open, because it was the only drawer with a lock, and the lock was unlatched. She should have left. She opened it. There were files inside, standard orphanage records, the kind she'd seen before. She almost closed the drawer. Then she saw the label on the folder at the back. Not a name, a case number. And beneath it, in smaller print, a surname she had never seen attached to herself or Kai in 9 years of paperwork. Korean, for syllables. She pulled the folder. The first page was a placement record. Standard format, except the date was wrong. She and Kai hadn't arrived at this orphanage as infants the way they'd always been told. The record showed a transfer. From somewhere else. Under different names. With a case number that connected to something called a disappearance record rather than an abandonment filing. They weren't left. They were placed. Deliberately. By someone with access to systems ordinary people don't touch. She was on the 3rd page when the door handle moved. Mira shoved the folder back, took 3 steps toward the window, changed her mind, stepped behind the door instead. The assistant walked in, went straight to the desk, opened the bottom drawer. Stopped. The lock was still unlatched. The folder was slightly crooked. The assistant turned around. Mira was already gone. She didn't tell Kai that night. Or the next night. She lay in the dark listening to him breathe in the bunk below and thought about the surname on that folder and what it meant that someone had buried it under a lock in a drawer in an office where children were never supposed to go. She thought about it for 3 months. Then she packed 2 bags, memorized the guard rotation, identified the one structural weakness in the east wall, and waited for a night with enough rain to cover sound. She chose tonight. They were 4 blocks from the orphanage before Mira slowed down. Kai kept pace, breathing hard. Captain still tucked under his arm. When they reached the underpass, he stopped, set the bear down with some dignity, and wrung out his sleeve with the focused attention of someone completing an important task. Then he picked Captain back up and inspected him for water damage. He's fine, Kai announced. Good. He's also very brave. Kai. I'm just saying, for a bear. Mira looked at the city ahead. Lights blurred in the rain. Somewhere out there was a name on a folder and a case number that connected to something 13 years old and deliberately hidden. She didn't know what it led to. She didn't know if anyone was looking for them or if someone had made sure no one ever would. She knew 2 things. They were out, and she wasn't going back. Kai appeared beside her, following her eye line into the city. He considered it seriously the way he considered most things, with his head slightly tilted and the expression of someone doing mental arithmetic no one asked for. So, he said, what's the plan? Survive tonight. And tomorrow? Survive tomorrow. He nodded slowly. That's not a very long plan. It's enough for now. He thought about it. Okay. He tucked Captain more securely under his arm. I support it. My lovelies, before we go further, I need to ask you something. If you were Mira and you'd just read that file, would you have run? Or would you have stayed and tried to find out more first? Tell me in the comments, because the choice she made is going to change everything. And if you're new here and this story already has you, you know what to do. Subscribe and don't leave, because what's coming next will make your jaw drop. They found shelter before midnight, an abandoned building 2 streets off the main road. Kai had spotted it an hour earlier when they passed a delivery truck parked outside with nobody in it. He'd noticed the truck's side mirror was angled toward the building's entrance, which meant someone had parked watching the door, which meant the building was worth watching, which meant it probably had something inside worth being in. Mira had stared at him when he explained this. You got all that from a mirror? And the tire tracks. Nobody parks facing inward unless they're watching something. Or hiding something. He paused. Or both. The building was empty. 3rd floor had a room with a door that locked from the inside, and windows that gave sight lines in 3 directions. Mira stood in the middle of it and felt something release in her chest. Not safety, exactly, but possibility. Kai set Captain in the driest corner, arranged their bags with more care than the situation required, and then sat down cross-legged and looked at her. Now can you tell me what was in the file? Mira looked at him. He'd known there was a file since the night she came back from the director's office moving wrong. Too carefully, too quietly, with the kind of stillness she got when she was carrying something heavy. He hadn't asked. Not once. He'd just waited. She sat down across from him. Our name, she said. Our real one. It isn't what they told us. Kai absorbed this. What is it? She told him the surname from the folder. Korean. For syllables. He tried it out loud, quietly, the way you test the weight of something before deciding whether to carry it. Then he looked at her. Does that mean someone knows who we are? Someone hid who we are. That's not the same thing. No, she said. It's not. He was quiet for a moment. Outside. The rain had started to ease. Somewhere below them a car passed, headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling. So someone put us there, Kai said. On purpose. Yes. And made sure we wouldn't know. Yes. He looked at Captain, then back at her. That's actually very rude. Mira almost laughed. Yes, it is. He nodded firmly, as though a decision had been reached. Okay, we find out why. Kai. Nuna. He looked at her with the steady, unreasonable certainty he'd had since he was 3 years old. We find out why, and then we fix it. She looked at her brother. 8 years old, soaking wet, one sock darker than the other from where he'd landed in the mud, and felt the thing in her chest tighten again. Okay, she said. We find out why. He nodded, lay down on his side, tucked Captain under his arm. Good plan, he said. Better than the last one. He was asleep in 4 minutes. Mira sat in the dark, listening to the city, and thought about a surname neither of them had been allowed to know. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to make them disappear. She was going to find out who, and she was going to find out why. But first, she had to keep them alive long enough to matter. My lovelies, we're just getting started, and I already have questions I know you're sitting with. Who hid that file? Why does their real name connect to a disappearance record and not an abandonment? And who exactly were these children before someone decided they needed to vanish? Drop your theories in the comments. I read every single one. And if nobody has told you yet, subscribe, because things are about to get very interesting. The city is bigger than they planned for, and someone in it is already watching. Surviving the first night was the easy part. Mira knew this. She'd known it before they jumped the wall. The orphanage had been predictable, cruel and small, consistent ways she'd learned to navigate. The street had no consistency at all. That was the danger. Not the cold, not hunger, the randomness. So she built a system. By the second morning, she had mapped 4 exits from the building, identified the nearest market, clocked the rhythm of foot traffic on the main road, and established 3 rules Kai was required to follow without debate. Rule 1. They moved together or not at all. Rule 2. If separated, the meeting point was the blue pharmacy sign 2 blocks east. Rule 3. Kai was not allowed to talk to strangers without her present. Kai listened to all 3 rules with appropriate seriousness. Then he said, "What counts as a stranger?" "Anyone we don't know." "We don't know anyone." Exactly. He considered this. That's going to make Rule 3 very limiting. That's the point. He looked at her with the expression he got when he disagreed with something, but had decided to let it exist temporarily. Okay, but I'm noting my objection. Noted. In my mental notebook. Kai. It's noted. The market was 3 blocks away, and it ran on a rhythm Mira clocked within 20 minutes of watching it. The vegetable vendor on the left tacked his display at 7:30 every morning, which meant he had his back turned for approximately 4 minutes. The bread seller 2 stalls down left the end pieces, the ones nobody bought, in a small pile at the corner of his table by mid-morning, and he never counted them. The woman selling rice at the far end gave larger portions to anyone who made eye contact, and said thank you in a specific dialect. Mira noted all of this, without moving from her position near the wall. Kai, beside her, was watching something else entirely. That man has been walking past the same 3 stalls for 40 minutes, he said quietly. Mira looked. A man in a dark jacket, moving slowly, hands in pockets. She'd clocked him as a browser. Kai was right, he'd made the same loop too many times. Watching someone, she asked. Watching us, I think. She didn't look at him directly. Since when? Since we came in. Kai tilted his head slightly. He's not very good at it. His shoes are wrong. What's wrong with his shoes? Mud on the left one only. He came from the east side. The only mud on the east side right now is near the underpass. Kai paused. Near our building. Mira kept her voice flat. You're sure? About the mud, yes. About everything else. He wobbled his hand slightly. 80%. They moved. Not fast, fast drew attention. They drifted left into the thicker part of the market crowd, using bodies as cover the way Mira had learned to use shadows. She bought one item at the bread stall, spent almost every one they had, and used the transaction to turn naturally and check behind them. The man had stopped following. Or he'd gotten better at it. One or the other. They ate behind the market, in an alley that smelled like cardboard and yesterday's fish. Kai ate his half with the focused attention he gave everything important. Mira ate slowly, thinking. They needed money. Real money. Enough to stay flexible, to move if they needed to eat more than once a day. I have an idea, Kai said. No. You haven't heard it. Your ideas require talking to strangers. He pointed at her. That is a fair point. But Rule 3 says I can't talk to strangers without you present. He spread his hands. You'd be present. She looked at him. He looked back with a patient, reasonable expression of someone who has already won and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up. The idea was this. Kai would offer to carry bags for market shoppers leaving with heavy loads. Genuinely carry them, to their cars, to the bus stop wherever they needed. He would be polite, helpful, and completely non-threatening, which he was naturally, being 8 years old and approximately the height of most adults' elbows. Mira would stay close. She would not intervene unless necessary. It worked better than it had any right to. Kai had a quality that was difficult to name and impossible to manufacture. He listened to people like what they were saying was the most reasonable thing he'd ever heard, even when it wasn't, and he asked follow-up questions that made them feel like experts on their own lives. Within 20 minutes, he had carried 4 bags, been given money by 3 people, and been offered a biscuit by an elderly woman who told him he reminded her of her grandson, and then cried briefly about it. He accepted the biscuit with genuine gratitude and brought the money directly to Mira. I think that woman needed someone to talk to, he said. Did you charge her? No. He looked mildly offended. She was sad. You don't charge sad people. Mira counted the money. 17,001. It was more than she'd expected. How did you get this much from the other 3? The man in the gray coat tipped me extra because I noticed his car was a limited edition model and he was very happy about that. Kai paused. I don't know what limited edition means for cars, but he did, and that was enough. Mira stared at her brother. I just said what I saw, he said simply. They returned to the building before dark. Mira ran the numbers while Kai reorganized their bags with the methodical energy he applied to anything he decided mattered. They had enough for 2, maybe 3 days. After that, they'd need to work the market again, or find something else. She was still calculating when Kai stopped moving. Nuna. She looked up. He was standing near the window, not touching it, looking down at the street below. She crossed the room and looked. Their corner of the entrance, the spot where they'd left their bags that morning while they scouted, had been disturbed. Nothing taken. She could tell from here. The positions were different, but the bags were intact. And beside them, placed neatly against the wall, was a small paper bag. They looked at each other. They went down together, Mira first. She checked the street in both directions before approaching. The paper bag held food, proper food, not market scraps. Packaged, clean, the kind that came from somewhere with a real kitchen. No note. No indication of who'd left it or when. Kai picked it up, turned it over, brought it close to his face, and inhaled with the seriousness of a professional making an assessment. Not poisoned, he said. Mira kept scanning the street. You can't smell poison, Kai. I can't smell most poison. He considered the bag. But this smells like an expensive kind of food. Expensive people don't poison things. They have other ways to cause problems. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back, perfectly calm. That is genuinely alarming logic, she said. But is it wrong? She took the bag. They went back upstairs. They ate in silence, and Mira watched the street from the window, while Kai watched her watch the street. Somewhere out there, someone knew where they were sleeping. Someone had walked to this exact spot, left food, and left without asking for anything. Kai set down his food and looked at her. Someone is watching us. Yes. Not the man from the market. This is different. She looked at him. You got that from a paper bag? I got it from the fact that the bag was placed neatly. He said it like it was obvious. The market man was careless, muddy shoes, same loop, bad positioning. Whoever left this was careful. He picked his food back up. That's a different kind of person. Mira turned back to the window. Somewhere in the city, careful and deliberate, someone was paying attention to two children who were supposed to have disappeared. The question wasn't whether to be afraid. The question was why. Kwon Nam-jun did not do things without reasons. This was a fact people in his world understood the way they understood gravity, not because anyone explained it, but because the alternative was unthinkable. Every meeting had a purpose. Every silence was calculated. Every room he entered had already been assessed before he stepped through the door. So when his driver asked, for the third morning in a row, why they were taking the eastern route through the market district instead of the expressway, Nam-jun said, traffic. His driver said nothing. They both knew there was no traffic at 6:40 in the morning. They took the eastern route. He'd built the kind of reputation that arrived in a room before he did. Not because he wanted it or not entirely. It had simply accumulated over 20 years the way scar tissue accumulates, layer by layer, incident by incident, until the original wound was buried so deep nobody remembered what caused it. Men who ran entire operations became careful with their words around him. Rooms recalibrated when he entered. His second-in-command, Do-won, had once told him that his name alone had closed 3 negotiations without a single meeting. Nam-jun had found that neither impressive nor useful. Impressive didn't get you out. And for 2 years now, getting out was the only thing he was working toward. Quietly, methodically, one piece at a time. Do-won managed the day-to-day. Do-won was good at it, efficient, loyal, and had been at Nam-jun's right hand for 15 years. Nam-jun trusted him with operations, with numbers, with the mechanical running of a world he was slowly trying to dismantle. He did not think about whether he trusted him with anything else. There was no reason to. The first time he saw the girl, it meant nothing. She was moving through the market with a younger boy at her shoulder, both of them too deliberate to be browsing, too calm to be lost. He noticed them the way he noticed everything, automatically, without deciding to, and then his attention moved on. The second time, 2 days later, he noticed the boy first. He was helping an elderly woman with her bags, talking to her with a focus that looked almost professional for someone his size. The woman was smiling. The boy had the particular quality of someone who listened like it cost him nothing. Nam-jun watched for 30 seconds. Moved on. The third time, he almost didn't go to the market at all. He had a meeting at 9. A call at 11. Nothing that required him to be in this district at dawn. He told his driver the expressway. They were 3 blocks away when he said, quietly, east route. His driver adjusted without comment. And that was when he saw the necklace. The girl was standing at the edge of the market, slightly apart from the crowd, watching her brother work. Her jacket was too big. A boy's jacket, probably. Picked up somewhere practical rather than chosen. Her hair was full and fluffy, simple. Nothing that drew attention. But the necklace caught the light. Half a jade pendant. Crescent-shaped. One side smooth. One side engraved. Nam-jun stopped walking. The world continued around him. Vendors, carts, morning noise, and he stood completely still in the middle of it and looked at a piece of jade hanging around a 13-year-old girl's neck that should not exist. He had bought the matching half from an artisan in Jeonju 17 years ago. A single pendant, split in 2, with one sentence engraved across both pieces. You only understood what it said if you held them together. He'd given the complete pendant to one person. She'd kept one half and returned the other to him and said she'd give it to their daughter someday, when their daughter was old enough to understand what it meant. He still had his half. He'd carried it for 13 years. Since the night Do-won sat across from him in a hospital corridor and told him there had been an accident and his family was gone. He looked at the girl. She hadn't noticed him. She was watching her brother, one eye on the street, doing 3 things at once with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd been keeping them both alive for a long time. He looked at the pendant again. Then, he made himself move. He walked past them, did not slow down, did not look back. Got into his car. Sat in silence for 40 seconds while his driver waited. Take me to the office, he said. He spent the rest of that day doing nothing productive at all. He came back the next morning, and the morning after that. He told himself he was verifying. The pendant could be a coincidence, mass-produced, similar design, meaningless. He told himself this with the systematic discipline of a man who had survived 20 years by not allowing himself to want things that weren't there. But he kept coming back. He started leaving food. Not because he decided to the first time. He simply found himself standing outside their building at 6 in the morning holding a bag from a restaurant 3 streets over, and he had no memory of deciding to buy it. He left it, walked away, did not examine what that meant. He noticed other things. The boy saw things nobody else saw. He'd watched him clock a tail from 40 meters, identify a vendor's pattern from one pass, read a stranger's emotional state from the angle of a parked car's mirror. He did all of this while appearing to do absolutely nothing, which was either the best instinct Namjoon had ever seen in someone that small or the most alarming. Possibly both. The girl planned. She was always 3 steps ahead of the current moment, running contingencies in the background while handling whatever was directly in front of her. She trusted nobody. She watched every adult who came within 10 meters of them with a flat, assessing look of someone who had been let down so many times that trust had simply become a resource she couldn't afford. He recognized that look. He'd had it at 22. He still had it now most days. He was watching them from across the street on the 4th morning, coffee in hand, his driver pointedly saying nothing from the car behind him, when the boy turned around and looked directly at him. Not the approximate direction. Not a general scan of the area. Directly at him. Across the street, through the crowd, with the calm certainty of someone who'd known exactly where to look. They held eye contact for a moment. Then the boy turned back to his sister and said something Namjoon couldn't hear. The girl's hand tightened on her brother's shoulder. She didn't look at Namjoon, but her whole body shifted. The slight repositioning of someone placing themselves between a potential threat and something they're protecting. Namjoon drank his coffee. Across the street, the boy glanced back at him one more time. No fear. Just the straightforward assessment of someone taking inventory. Then he said something else to his sister, and she almost looked over. Namjoon turned and walked back to his car. Same time tomorrow? His driver asked. Namjoon said nothing. His driver took that as a yes. That evening Namjoon sat in his office and opened a drawer he hadn't opened in 2 years. Inside was a photograph, old enough that the edges had softened. A woman. Dark full hair, serious eyes, the kind of face that looked like it was about to say something worth hearing. Beside her, 2 kids. One 3 or 4, the second an infant, both asleep, both with their faces turned toward each other the way very small children do when they've decided the world outside each other is secondary. He'd looked at this photograph 10,000 times. He looked at it again. Then he looked at the jade pendant in his other hand, his half, the one he'd carried since the night he lost everything, and he thought about a crescent shape catching morning light around a girl's neck, and he thought about what it would mean if the thing he was thinking was true. He put the photograph back. He closed the drawer. He picked up his phone and called Doan. The Eastern District, he said when Doan answered. I want everything we have on any orphanage transfers processed 13 years ago. Unofficial channels. Cases that were handled outside standard filing. A pause. Short. Half a second. Maybe less. Of course, Doan said. Any specific parameters? I'll know it when I see it. He ended the call. He sat in his office for a long time after that. The man had been in the alley for 11 minutes. Kai knew this because he'd been watching him since minute 2, from the window above, tracking him the way he tracked anything that didn't fit, without moving, without pointing, without making it obvious that he was watching at all. The man wasn't lost. Lost people moved. This one had positioned himself with a clear sight line to the building entrance, and hadn't shifted since. Kai went to find Mira. She was already at the other window. South side, she said, without turning. Another one. Different jacket, same posture. So not 1, 2. Kai looked at both entry points mentally, ran the options, discarded 3 of them. Roof. Checked. Someone's at the fire escape. 3. He looked at Myra's face. She was doing the thing she did when the variables stopped cooperating, very still, very fast, processing without showing it. He'd seen that face his whole life. It meant she was close to a plan, but not there yet. The market, he said. She looked at him. If we go out the back window onto the delivery ledge, it's 8 feet to the adjacent building's roof. From there we can come down the service stairs and exit onto the market street. He paused. They're watching the entrances, not the roof-to-roof. You measured that ledge gap? Yesterday. You were counting money. She looked at him for one more second. Then she picked up both bags. Go. The ledge gap was 8 feet. It was also, at close range, significantly more alarming than it had seemed from the window. Kai went first because Mira made him, She needed to see him clear it before she committed. He looked at the gap, looked at the adjacent roof, made a brief internal assessment, and jumped. He landed with both feet, stumbled one step, stopped. Turned back. Fine, he said quietly. Also, Captain is fine. Mira threw the bags across first, then jumped. She landed clean, grabbed him, and they were moving before she'd fully straightened up. The service stairs were exactly where Kai said they'd be. They came out onto the market street at 7:43 in the morning, walking normally, 2 children among the early crowd. They made it 4 blocks before the man in the dark jacket stepped out of a doorway directly in front of them. Not the man from the alley. A third one. Mira stopped, pulled Kai behind her. The man was large, not threatening in his posture, which was almost worse, because it meant he was comfortable. He looked at them the way someone looks at something they've already decided belongs to them. You've been hard to find, he said. We weren't hiding, Kai said, from behind Myra's shoulder. Kai. I mean, technically we were, but not from this man specifically. The man took 1 step forward. Behind them, Mira heard a second set of footsteps closing the distance. Pinned. She ran the options, none of them clean. She needed a crowd, needed noise, needed something that made this man's next move visible and therefore costly. Then Kai stepped around her. She grabbed for him. Missed. He walked directly up to the man, stopped about 3 feet away, looked up at him with a calm, earnest expression he used when he was about to say something that sounded innocent and wasn't, and said, at full conversational volume on a street filling with morning foot traffic, "Excuse me, why are you following children? Should I call someone?" A woman with a shopping bag turned her head. Then a man with a bicycle. Then 2 more. The man in the dark jacket went completely still. His hand, which had been moving toward Kai's shoulder, stopped. You could not grab a child on a public street in front of 8 witnesses without consequences, and every person within earshot had just become a witness. He looked at Kai. Kai looked back with the patient expression of someone waiting for an answer. The man took a step back. Mira grabbed Kai's arm and pulled. They turned, moved fast, head down through the growing crowd, took the first corner, then the second, and ran directly into Kwon Nam-jin. He was taller than she'd registered from across the street. He stood on the pavement with the particular stillness of someone who didn't need to fill space because space already arranged itself around him, coffee in one hand, looking at them with an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. Behind them the footsteps were getting closer. Kai looked at the men behind them, looked at Nam-jun, made a calculation that lasted approximately 1.5 seconds, and stepped behind Nam-jun. Not beside him. Behind him. As though the decision was obvious, the authorization was implied, and the concept of asking permission had simply not occurred to him. The men from the alley came around the corner and stopped. Because there are people you approach and people you don't, and Kwon Nam-jun was the category of person that most men in the city had decided, at some point and for very good reasons, to leave entirely alone. The 2 men looked at each other. Then they looked at the child standing behind the one-man nobody in their right mind cornered on a public street. Nam-jun looked at them. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. They left. Mira hadn't moved. She stood 2 feet in front of Nam-jun and watched the men go, and then looked back at him with the flat, measuring look she gave every adult, the one that started at 0 and required evidence to move higher. He looked back at her without pressure, without the particular brightness of someone trying to seem safe. He just waited, like he had somewhere to be and had decided this was now it. From behind him, Kai said, "Thank you." Nam-jun glanced back at him, then at Mira. "You're hungry," he said. It wasn't a question. They sat in a restaurant 2 streets over that was too expensive for the hour. Mira chose the seat facing the door without thinking about it. Nam-jun sat across from her and didn't comment on the choice. Kai ordered 3 things. The waitress wrote them down with the careful neutrality of someone who had seen stranger things before breakfast. Nobody spoke for the first few minutes. Mira watched Nam-jun's hands. Both of them, the whole meal, the way she watched every adult's hands, waiting for the moment they moved toward something that wasn't food. They didn't. He ate. He drank his coffee. He looked out the window occasionally, with the expression of someone running a separate conversation in his head. He didn't ask them anything. Not their names. Not where they lived. Not why 3 men had been waiting outside their building at dawn. He ate his breakfast and let the silence exist without filling it, which was so unlike every adult Mira had encountered in 7 years that she didn't know what to do with it. Kai, by contrast, had finished 2 of his 3 dishes and was studying Nam-jun with open, unguarded interest. "You knew those men," Kai said. Nam-jun looked at him. "What makes you think that? You didn't look surprised when they left." Kai tilted his head. Surprised people look twice at the thing that surprised them. You looked once, and went back to your coffee. A pause. "You're observant," Nam-jun said. I notice things, Kai said simply. It's different. Namjoon considered that. Then, with something that wasn't quite a smile but existed in the same neighborhood. Yes, it is. Mira said nothing. She was watching the exchange with the attention of someone cataloging data, how he responded, what he didn't say, where his eyes went when Kai surprised him. She was building a picture. She didn't have enough pieces yet. When they finished, Namjoon put money on the table, without counting it. Stood. Looked at them both. Don't sleep near the East Market tonight, he said. Then he walked out. Mira stared at the door. Kai watched him go with the expression of someone completing a long mental calculation and arriving at a satisfying answer. Then he turned to Mira. He picked up his third dish, which he had been saving. I like him, he said. Mira said nothing, but she didn't disagree. And she was still thinking about the East Market warning, how he'd said it not like advice, but like someone who already knew what was there. Like someone who had put those men outside their building and then, for a reason she couldn't map yet, decided to call them off. She picked up her jacket. Outside, the city moved like nothing had happened. Somewhere in it, Kwon Namjoon was walking back to a car she couldn't see, carrying a reason he hadn't shared, watching two children he had no clean explanation for knowing. Mira noted it. She didn't understand it yet, but she would. They moved buildings that night. Not because of the East Market warning specifically, because of what the warning implied. Someone knew their location. That meant the location was finished, regardless of how carefully they'd chosen it. Mira had a backup identified already 3 streets north, a different building, different sight lines. They were inside it before 9.
Kai didn't complain.
He carried his bag and captain and asked 0 questions about the move, which meant he'd already reached the same conclusion she had and was simply waiting for her to act on it. They set up in silence. When they were done, Kai sat cross-legged on the floor, looked at her and said, "Tell me what was in the file." She'd been deciding how much to say for 5 days. Not whether to tell him. She'd never considered keeping it from him permanently. Kai was her person. Whatever this was, it was his too. But 8 was young for certain kinds of weight, and she'd been trying to find the version of the truth that informed him without flattening him. She looked at him now, cross-legged, straight-backed, captain in his lap, watching her with the patient certainty of someone who had already decided he could handle whatever came next, and she let go of the edited version. She told him everything. Their names in the orphanage were not their names. The file had a different surname, Korean, for syllables, nothing she'd ever seen attached to them in 9 years of paperwork. The placement record showed a transfer date, not an intake date, which meant they hadn't arrived as infants the way they'd been told. They'd come from somewhere else, under different identities, processed through a channel that didn't appear in any standard filing system. And the case number on the folder didn't connect to an abandonment record. It connected to a disappearance. Kai listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat quietly for a moment, turning it over. "So we weren't left," he said.
No.
"Someone moved us. On purpose." "Yes." "And made a new file, with new names, so nobody could find us." "That's what it looks like." He was quiet again. Outside, a motorbike passed. The sound faded. "That takes a specific kind of person," Kai said. He looked at her. "That's not a random person, Nana. That's someone who has access to deep systems, not just money. Or knows someone who does." Mira looked at her brother. "You're 8, she said. "I'm almost 9, and I always read." He picked at a thread on Captain's ear. "Does that mean someone's been looking for us?" There it was. The question she'd been carrying since the orphanage hallway. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But it means someone knew we existed. Knew where we came from. Knew enough to hide us." He looked up. "Which means somewhere there's a person who had a reason to want us hidden." "Yes. And somewhere there might be a person who had a reason to look." She didn't answer. Kai nodded slowly, as though confirming something internal. Then he looked at Captain, then back at her, with the expression he got when he'd made a decision that wasn't up for discussion. "We find them," he said. "Both of them. Whoever hit us, and whoever's looking." He paused. "We find the file first. Or another one like it. We don't have access to any filing system." "We don't," Kai agreed. He looked toward the window, in the direction of the restaurant they'd sat in that morning. "But I think we know someone who might." Mira followed his eyeline. She said nothing for a long moment. "We don't know anything about him. We know he called off 3 men with 1 look," Kai said. "We know he knew where we were sleeping. We know he warned us before we needed the warning." He tilted his head. "And we know he looked at your necklace." Myra's hand went to the pendant automatically. "He looked at it twice," Kai said. "The second time, he thought you weren't watching." She had noticed. She hadn't said anything because she hadn't known what to do with it. "That's not nothing," Kai said simply.
No.
It wasn't. Kwon Nam-jun sat in his office at 11:43 at night with 17 years of filed records open on his screen and a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in a very long time sitting in his chest like a foreign object. He'd spent the day dismantling Do-won's half-second pause. Not confronting it, he wasn't ready for that, not until he understood the shape of what he was looking at. You didn't confront something until you knew what it was. You mapped it first. You found the edges. You understood what you were holding before you decided what to do with it. He pulled the orphanage transfer records Do-won had sent him. Standard files.
Clean.
Properly formatted, correctly dated, nothing obviously wrong. That was the problem. Nam-jun had spent 20 years in a world where paperwork was a weapon. He knew what real records looked like, and he knew what constructed records looked like, and the difference wasn't in any single detail. It was in the aggregate. Real records had small inconsistencies. Wrong fonts from a software update. A clerk's handwriting changing slightly year to year. Timestamps that didn't quite align because systems weren't synced. These records were perfect. Every field consistent. Every date clean. Every signature uniform. Nobody's records were that clean unless someone had gone through them afterward and made them that way. He sat back. 13 years ago, Do-won had sat across from him in a hospital corridor and told him there had been an accident. A car. A mountain road. His wife and infant children gone. The bodies had been recovered, identified, handled. Nam-jun hadn't asked to see them. He hadn't been capable of asking anything. He'd sat in that corridor for 6 hours and then he'd gone home, and he hadn't spoken to anyone for 4 days. He'd trusted Do-won to handle it. He'd trusted Do-won with everything. He picked up the photograph from his desk. The woman. The 2 children. He looked at the girl's face in the photo. 4. Indistinct. The way all children were. And then he thought about a 13-year-old moving through a market with flat, assessing eyes and a jade pendant catching the light. He thought about a boy who noticed things. He opened a second set of records. Not the ones Do-won had sent. His own. Parallel files he'd maintained for years out of a habit of redundancy that Do-won didn't know about. He cross-referenced the transfer dates. 3 of them didn't match. Small discrepancy. For days, in one case 6. The kind of gap you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. The kind of gap that appeared when records were backdated, when something happened and then someone went in afterward and made the paperwork say it happened earlier. Nam-jun stared at the screen. For days. 6 days. The window in which a person or 2 very small people could be moved from one place to another and processed under new identities before the official record caught up. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark for a long time. Then he opened his drawer and took out the jade pendant, his half, the one he'd carried since the night Do-won told him his family was gone. He held it in his palm.
Small.
Crescent-shaped. One side smooth. One side engraved with half a sentence he hadn't been able to read completely in 13 years because you needed both pieces to understand what it said. He thought about a girl who'd worn the other half her whole life without knowing what language the engraving was in. He closed his hand around the pendant. Tomorrow. He would find them tomorrow. He found them in the market. Not by accident. He'd spent the morning making calls, quiet ones, to people who owed him answers and knew better than to provide slow ones. By 8 he had a general area. By 9 he had a street. He didn't send anyone else. He went himself, alone, which was the kind of decision his security team had learned not to argue with, because arguing with Nam-jun about operational decisions had a consistent and unpleasant outcome. He stood at the edge of the market and waited. They appeared at 9:40. He watched them work. The girl first, running her morning assessment of the stalls, clocking the crowd, identifying variables. Then the boy, breaking off toward the bag-carrying corner of the market where he'd apparently established something resembling a regular operation. A woman handed him 2 heavy bags. He took them without adjusting his posture, which meant he'd carried heavier, and fell into step beside her. Nam-jun watched the boy. He had a quality that was genuinely difficult to categorize. It wasn't charm exactly. Charm was performed, and this child performed nothing. He simply gave people his complete attention, and somehow that was enough. The woman with the bags was talking. The boy was listening with the focused engagement of a much older person, asking something that made her laugh, and she laughed the way people laugh when something surprises them into it. He helped 3 more people in 20 minutes. Each one left looking slightly better than they had before. Nam-jun stood at the edge of the market and watched and felt something in his chest that he had no clean word for. Then the boy reached for a bag someone was handing him, leaned forward, arm extended, collar shifting with the movement, and Nam-jun saw the mark on his neck. The breath left his body without permission. Small. Irregular edges, deep brown, just below the left side of the jaw where the neck met the collar. The boy straightened up, collar settled back into place, and he was already moving toward the next person. Nam-jun didn't move. He'd had the same mark his entire life. Same location, same shape, same irregular edges. His mother had called it a family mark, had shown him a photograph of his own father with an identical one, and his grandfather before that. He'd assumed it was the kind of thing that appeared occasionally across a bloodline, unremarkable, coincidental. When his daughter was born with one, he'd held her in the delivery room and looked at it for a long time and felt something so large he couldn't name it. He'd shown Mira. She'd touched it gently and said it meant the baby was his, as if there had been any question. He looked at the boy across the market. Same mark. Same location. He started walking before he'd decided to. He crossed the market in 2 minutes. The boy had finished with his last customer and was heading back toward his sister, money in hand, saying something that made him smile to himself before he'd even reached her. Namjoon stopped 10 feet away. The girl saw him first. She always saw him first. He noted that, the way her awareness extended further than most adults he knew. She stepped slightly forward, positioning herself, and looked at him with a flat assessment she'd given him at the restaurant. Starting at 0. Waiting for evidence. He looked at the pendant. Up close it was exactly what he'd known it would be. The engraving on her half. He could see the characters now, small and precise, curving along the inner edge.
He knew what they said.
He knew what the complete sentence said because he had chosen every word of it himself in a shop in Jeonju 17 years ago, standing next to a woman who'd read it and looked at him with an expression he had never entirely recovered from. He looked at the girl's face. Then at the boy, who had arrived at his sister's shoulder and was looking at Namjoon with a direct, uncomplicated attention he gave everything. Namjoon opened his mouth, closed it. There was no version of this sentence that didn't sound like something a person would say if they were trying to manipulate 2 children who had every reason not to trust adults. He had to ask anyway. What is your mother's name? The market continued around them. A vendor called out a price. Somewhere behind him a cart wheel squeaked against the pavement. The girl stared at him. Her expression didn't change. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out.
Because nobody had asked her that.
In 11 years, not a single adult, not a director, not a caseworker, not a teacher, had ever asked her mother's name. The orphanage didn't discuss it. The files didn't have it. It was the one question that had always been missing from every conversation about who she and Kai were and where they came from. From behind her, quietly, Kai spoke. He said a name. One name. 8 syllables. The name Mira had told him once. Years ago. A fragment from a memory so early she wasn't certain it was real or constructed. She'd said it to him when he was 5 and asked about their mother because she needed to give him something, even something small. She'd said, I think her name was Scarlet. Kai had remembered. He always remembered. Namjoon heard the name and the market disappeared. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It simply became irrelevant. The noise, the crowd, the mourning. All of it receded to somewhere outside the narrow space between him and these 2 children. He heard the name, and his body made a decision his mind was still catching up to. He sat down on the step behind him. Just sat. Like his legs had assessed the situation and concluded that standing was no longer the priority. He looked at the pendant in her hand. He looked at the boy's neck, where the collar had shifted again slightly. He looked at the girl's face. Properly, for the first time, without the distance of surveillance or the filter of needing to be certain before he let himself see it. She had Scarlett's eyes. Not the color, the quality. The way they processed a room before they accepted it. The way they held information without displaying it. The way they watched him right now, this second, simultaneously trying to understand what was happening and preparing for it to be something that required running from. The boy was watching him with something entirely different. No alarm. No preparation. Just the focused, gentle attention of someone watching a person experience something significant and deciding to give them room for it. Did we say something wrong? Kai asked. His voice was careful. Not afraid. Just careful. The way you're careful with something that looks like it might break. Namjoon looked at him. 8 years old. Neck birthmark. Noticed things nobody else noticed. Walked behind a stranger in an alley on pure instinct and turned out to be completely right about him. No, Namjoon said. His voice came out lower than he intended. You didn't say anything wrong. Kai nodded. Accepted this. Then he looked at his sister with the expression he used when he'd reached a conclusion and was checking whether she'd reached the same one. She hadn't moved. She was still looking at Namjoon at the step he was sitting on at his hands at the place where the morning had apparently broken something open in a man who didn't look like the kind of man things broke open in. Namjoon reached into his jacket. He felt her tense. The whole body readiness of someone who had learned that hands going into jackets meant something, and he moved slowly, deliberately, so she could see. He brought out the pendant. His half. Crescent-shaped. One side smooth. One side engraved. He held it out on his palm, not toward her, just visible, just present.
She looked at it.
Then at hers. Then at his face. The two have sat in the air between them, not touching, not yet, but even from this distance the shape was obvious. They were made for each other. Split from the same piece of jade, separated, carrying half a sentence each that neither could read alone. Myra's hand closed around her pendant. Namjoon didn't move, didn't push. He sat on the step and held his half out, and let her look at it for as long as she needed. Kai, from her shoulder, looked at the two pieces of jade. Looked at Namjoon. Looked at his sister. His expression was very still, not the stillness of confusion, but the stillness of someone who has just had a very large thought confirmed and is now waiting to see what everyone else is going to do about it. Nuna, he said quietly. She didn't answer. Nuna. He touched her arm. Just 2 fingers. Just enough. Look at his neck. She looked. Below Namjoon's jaw, just visible above his collar, the same mark. Same location. Same irregular edges. She'd seen it on herself and Kai every day of her life. She knew its exact shape the way she knew the sound of his breathing and the particular way he held his shoulders when he was tired. She looked at Namjoon. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that the mark and the pendant and the name hadn't already said more plainly than words could. He just waited. Mira stood in the middle of the market with 11 years of survival behind her and her brother's hand on her arm and a man sitting on a step in front of her who was looking at her the way people looked at things they had stopped believing in and then found again when they weren't prepared for it. Her hand was shaking. Not much. Just at the edge. Just enough that Kai noticed and moved slightly closer without making a thing of it. She didn't run. That was all. She didn't run. And in the architecture of who Mira was and what she'd learned to do when things became uncertain, not running was everything. Namjoon looked at her shaking hand and looked at her face and did not reach for her and did not speak and gave her every second she needed. The market moved around all 3 of them like water around stone. My lovelies, the pendant, the birthmark, the name. It's all there. Everything. And she didn't run. Tell me in the comments, what did that last moment do to you? Because it wrecked me writing it. And we're not done. Not even close. Because finding him was never the hardest part. The hardest part is what Mira does next, and whether 13 years of surviving alone leaves any room for what he's about to tell her. Subscribe if you haven't already. Part 2 is where everything really comes to light and answers all the questions you've been asking yourself.